Hi there, my name's John Stevens. I'm pastor of Zion Lutheran Church in Oregon City, Oregon, and we are part of the ELCA. And welcome to Dollar Store Children's Sermons, where we take a look at the lectionary text and we tie them to an item from the Dollar Tree or the junk drawer or the kids' room or the garage. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your week with me in this way, but most importantly, thank you for the love that you're sharing with your kids and your congregations and your families. You are rocking it. So thank you. This is for the narrative lectionary, and we are looking at the Passover. And this text is broken up into two places. It's in two ways. One is God talking about how the Passover will be and what to do and prepare, and God makes a promise to the people. This is what you need to do and prepare, and God makes a promise. And then the second part is, how do you remember that God was faithful and God was fulfilled God's promise? So one is about knowing that God is doing this, and then the other is that God has done this, and how do you remember that? So two different directions. One is focusing on that first part, is having a letter, maybe a treasure map. Maybe you've got this treasure map, and you've got the treasure map. Maybe it's the map of the church, and then in there you have an X marks the spot, and you're gonna search for, and the X marks the spot isn't any place really hidden. Maybe you have it down on the fellowship. You say, after church during coffee hour, during fellowship time, downstairs on this table where there's the X, there is something for you. And maybe that's a set of donuts. Maybe that's coloring books and some crayons. But there's a promise made that when they follow this and they get down there, that's where it is. And talking about how connecting it to the promise that God made to the Israelites, that this is what we're going to do. This is what I'm made this. God says, I am making this promise that this is what I'm going to do. And it's a way for me to get into what's going on with this story with not diving. We can dive really deep and really dark in there. But in that, more than anything, talking about how God is faithful to God's promise, and that as we make that journey and we find there, and goes, yeah. So there's that. The second direction is looking at memory food, looking at foods that bring up good memories for us. You see, for me, homemade raspberry jam, that's a good memory for me. The reason is because up near our cabin, if you're up at our cabin at a particular time of year, late spring, before it gets too hot, it's like there's a couple of weeks in there where we have wild raspberries, and they are delicious. And I remember one year I picked raspberries. I picked not that many raspberries, maybe 2 cups, maybe 3, I don't know, but not that many. And I asked my grandmother, Ma, I asked her to make raspberry jam, and she did. And I did not know what went into making raspberry jam, and how many raspberries do you usually use to make raspberry jam. But she made raspberry jam out of the little bit of raspberries that I picked. And I still, to this day, remember that so fondly. I mean, it warms my heart to the core about that. And I think about the memory food. And I think about when we connect that memory food we got in the Passover, when we tell the story, and there's the memory food that happens there about these are the things you remember the story. I remember the story about Ma, when the Jewish people experience and celebrate the Passover and they're eating that meal, they remember the story. They remember the God that was faithful and the promise that God did and came through. When we meet and when we gather around the table and we hear the words of institution, this is my body, this is my blood, bread and wine, broken and shed for you. And we hear that and we remember. We remember and we are remembered again on that day, where we tell the story and we hear the story and we relive the story and we know what Christ has done for us and the grace that is given for us at this table. That memory food that happens there. And memory food doesn't just happen here when we remember it, but memory food happens here because we can feel it and we know it. And you could talk to your kids about what's a favorite meal that your parents make? What's a favorite meal that you love to have on your birthday? What's a favorite meal that you have at Christmas? When you get together for Christmas, what's the one thing that you cannot wait to eat? And talk about memory food and the connection to ultimately the story about how the table of the Lord and the table at home and all of these things are connected to the promise that God makes to you and I and to the world. All right, so that I'm hoping can be a springboard for your own children's sermon. And thank you again so much for being here, your partnership in the ministry, and your love that you are sharing with your kids and your congregations and your families. You are rocking it. All right, peace. We will see you next week.